with us today. My name is Demetrius Jaggers. I have the privilege of serving as the Senior Director of the Dowdy Multicultural Center. We'd like to welcome you tonight to our one of our programs that we have planned for Black History Month. Tonight we are excited about hearing from our special guests. The title of tonight's event is Black History Month Lecture, Making History, Black Voters and Black Women. And I am going to introduce one of our lovely student workers, Anania Jones, or Nani for short, who will provide an introduction of our guest speaker. So we look forward to spending the rest of our time together with you all this evening.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to welcome Nyle Fort. Niall Ford is a minister, activist, and scholar based in Newark, New Jersey. He has worked in education, criminal justice, and youth development for over a decade. Niall's activism involves local, national, and international efforts. In 2014, after the tragic shooting death of Michael Brown, he traveled to Ferguson, Missouri to help build the movement for Black lives. Niall has also traveled to over 12 countries to learn, teach, and strategize around issues of democracy and inequality. Please join me in welcoming Nyle Fort.
Hi, everyone. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. I can see a few of y'all. I can't see. I would love to see more, but I won't put you on the spot and make you come on. So before I start cracking jokes and stuff, let me do my formalities. Thank you all for having me again. I saw some of you earlier, so it's good to see you back. Very nice to see you. We had a great I thought we had a great conversation earlier, so I've been mulling on it ever since. But yeah, I'm just very excited to be here. I'm gonna get right into it so that we can hopefully spend a decent amount of time, especially because there's a smaller group, sort of like earlier, especially when we have these opportunities to have conversations. I think it's so important. You know, I came out of the Black church, and so I know how to preach, I know how to talk, I can do that. But I truly think that if we're going to transform things, that it's gonna take all of us, not one single person who can put it all on the table and then we just pick that up and say, this is what we have to do. I know that you all on the call have a lot to offer. And so I am going to say some things. After I say that, let's have a conversation and talk together. Is that cool? That's cool. All right. Y'all tired? Did y'all eat dinner yet? Somebody got the itis, and somebody know what I'm talking about when I say the itis. I could see it in somebody's eyes. No? All right. I'm eating after this, so I'm woke. I'm woke in multiple ways of the word. That's what the young people say, I'm woke. Okay, let me get to it. So before I start, I do want to say three things. The first of which you already know. So I'm a preacher, and I am also, what you may not know, I'm a big fan of the culture. So I love hip hop, all types of hip hop, going back to the 90s, Nas and Lauryn Hill, all the way to today. I'm talking about Young and May to J. Cole. You know, across the gamut. I love hip hop. And what's dope about hip hop in the Black church is that they actually, while they disagree on a lot of things, they do agree on at least one thing. And that one thing is called call and response. Do y'all know what call and response is? Okay, a few of y'all do. That just means when you listen to hip hop music, wouldn't it be a little weird if your friend just not moving, not shaking their head, not saying anything, not rapping along? You would feel a little uncomfortable about that, right? You probably turn to your friend and say, "What's wrong? You having a bad day?" And so call and response is kind of like that. The friend who doesn't do anything is not calling and responding. It's just a fancy way of saying, please let the Spirit lead you and be fully engaged in the conversation. The beauty about Black culture, whether it's the Black church or hip hop, is that we call on people to respond to what's being said. So even before we have Q&A, we're actually already in the spirit of Q&A because we're opening up ourselves to the conversation. So I feed off energy. Please feel free to call and response. That's number one. Number two is that I am a mama's boy. So I'm a preacher. I'm a hip hop head. I'm also a mama's boy. That's actually more important because I was first a mama's boy before anything. I'm the youngest of 8, and I do these talks a lot. I told some of you earlier, I do these talks a lot, and every time I do them, my mom asks me the same thing every time. She says, "Now, how did they like you?" And I got to be honest with my mama because I'm a mama's boy and I have a Black mama. I can't not be. It's bad if you're not honest with my mama, I'm telling you. And so y'all don't know my mama, but I know my mama, and y'all do not want my mama not to like you, okay? Somebody laughing, some people serious. I hope that serious face means you know what I'm talking about. So that's number two. So please, let's call and respond. Number three is, I'm not sure what your political orientation is. I'm not sure how you identify. I'm not sure what you believe. And I'm quite excited about the fact that I'm not sure. And the reason why is, we talked about food earlier. I'm guessing that everybody likes food like me. Everybody? If you don't, I will eat all your food for you. Just holler at me and let me know. I got you. So if you like food, then you might be like me and you may like buffets. The reason why I like buffets, and I especially like the buffets that have multiple cuisines, because they give you a lot of different options. So I love the buffets that I have Italian food and Chinese food, and hopefully it has soul food, because that's what I get. That's what my mama made me, soul food. I'm talking fried chicken, fried catfish, candied yams, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, cornbread. Y'all okay? All right, so I like this because, and I use it as an analogy when I speak, I want you to think about my talk as a food for thought. Food for thought. So imagine the buffet. We're all here together. And I'm inviting everybody to the table. I'm saying, come on and sit down with me. Grab your plates, whatever you like, and come sit down with me. Now, I have the honor and the privilege of talking about my food first. Like, y'all, I'm gonna tell you what's on my plate and why I'm so excited about what's on my plate. But you don't have to like everything that's on my plate. That's my plate. Now, I think it's good. I think you should try it. I think it's healthy and good for you, but it doesn't mean that you have to. I'm not gonna force you to eat it. What I hope that we can do, however, is that we can learn how to sit at the same table, even though we may have different tastes, even though we might be familiar with certain food as opposed to others. I hope that somebody's willing to try some new food. I'm definitely open to it. But that's just my very sophisticated and long-winded way of saying that we don't have to agree on everything. And actually, democracy at the heart of it is about us working through our diversity and our variety while holding close justice and freedom. Does that make sense, y'all? All right, so call and response, mama's boy, don't forget. And we're at the buffet together, so I'm calling you all here. So, you know, I'm gonna talk a little bit about Black history, and I am gonna focus a little bit on Dr. King. But I'm also going to get to some other components of Black history because it's extremely important. The reason why I'm going to focus a little bit on Dr. King is because he has such an influence over how we think about Black history and think about society. So with that said, I am very excited to talk more broadly during the Q&A about some of these questions in terms of voting and in terms of the importance of Black women throughout Black history and generally. So let's get into it. As I talk, if you have food that you don't like, please just tell me. Say, hey, I don't know about that point you made. Just let me know. If you have a question, I saw that food, I wasn't quite sure, what that was about, how many calories are in there. Just come up with questions, come up with comments, come up with things. Hey, I want to talk about this or that. Feel free to go ahead and put it right in the chat or right in the Q&A, so that by the time we go ahead and start the Q&A, we'll already have some of y'all food and we can eat together. That's cool? Y'all with me? Okay, I know it's late. So I'm gonna need y'all energy. So I talked to you about my mama, right? I'm gonna tell you a story if that's okay. I'm gonna tell you a story. Let me get y'all situated on my Zoom is so, different. It's nothing like having in person, but we're gonna make it happen. So my mom told me and my brother bedtime stories every night, y'all. She told me and my brother bedtime stories every night after long days of grieving, helping consoling grieving families. My mom's a mortician. That's for a whole nother talk. She would come home. She would take a long warm bath, and around 9 o'clock, she would sneak into our room with a big smile on her face. And my older brother, Chad, he would jump up and down in anticipation. He loved her stories. Now, being the youngest, I did everything my brother did. So guess what I did, y'all? I jumped up and down too. Come on, we're gonna work on it. We're gonna work on it. When my mom got to the scary part of the story and my brother Chad said, ooh, you know how kids do. What you think I said? Ooh, okay, all right. I'm gonna give y'all a little bit of time. My brother and I stayed in what we call the little room. The little room. The little room was a large closet turned makeshift bedroom that sat next to the sun parlor. And every time it rained, the sun parlor would flood and leave a mild, nauseating stench of mildew that lingered for days. Now, we had three types of clothes. I know y'all got Louis, Fendi, Gucci, Prada, right? Y'all got all that fancy stuff. We had three types of clothes. We had school clothes. Anybody know what I'm about to say? Church clothes. I'm giving away my age. And play clothes. We had three types: school clothes, church clothes. I got my church clothes on now, if you don't notice. They're just a little nicer than when I was a kid. Now, if you tried to be cool and wear your play clothes to school, that would be the last game you played in a while. Trust me, I know from experience. We wore hand-me-downs. We huddled around the stove when winter crept into the house. And we played games like Army and Manhunt. And we didn't have much at the time, but we had each other and we had stories. We had stories. There was one story that always stood out to me. My mom began it the same way every single time. She was so dramatic. She would say, "Once upon a time, there were two princes named Chad and Nyle." My mom knew what she was doing. This was the mid-1990s, on the heels of Reaganomics and in the heat of the largest prison boom in world history. I talked about the prison stuff a little bit earlier. I'm gonna get back into it a little bit. Someone by the name of Rodney King, some of you may remember his name. Rodney King was nearly beaten to death by the Los Angeles Police Department just 2 years after I was born. President Clinton was in the process of ending welfare as we know it. I know he gets a lot of praise and is even called the first Black president, but we look into the track record. He was in the process of ending welfare as we know it and actually building out the carceral state that we have now. And in the midst of this, no one in my immediate family had gotten past high school. I'm the first in my family to go to college. So to be finishing up the PhD now makes my mom smile real big. My mom may not have had a formal analysis of the political landscape that I was born into, but she knew from the sheer experience of raising a Black girl and 3 Black boys what we were up against. She may not have known that the United States was on its way to incarcerating more human beings than any other nation in human history. But she knew what it felt like to watch one of her sons walk into a courtroom in chains. She may not have known that, at least according to one report, every 28 hours in America, a Black person is killed by a police officer or a vigilante. And I'm not only talking about Black men who, yes, are disproportionately killed, but oftentimes get a lot of the attention. I'm talking about Black women like Breonna Taylor, Black girls like Ayanna Stanley Jones, 12 years old, who was sleeping on her grandmama's couch when a Detroit SWAT team raided her house and killed her as she took a nap. My mom may have not known about all of these patterns of police violence, but she knew to never let me leave the house without warning me 15, 20 times. "Nyle, be careful." I just turned 31. I'm 31. I gave away my age. I'm somewhere between, you know what J. Cole calls a middle child? Y'all know that? Somewhere between Meek Mill and Dr. King, somewhere in that middle. I just turned 31 years old and my mom still doesn't let me leave the house without warning me 15, 20 times. "Nyle, be careful." I doubt my mom kept up with unemployment statistics, but she knew that in our neighborhood and in so many neighborhoods like them, if you're young and you're Black and you're poor, then it's easier to find a gun than to find a job. But in my mother's stories, we were free to dream. We were free to be. We were free to fly above the turbulent winds of racial injustice. During the day, my brother and I may have been seen as statistics, but at bedtime, we were leaders in a land where everybody was free. So y'all still with me? I'm trying to get somewhere. Y'all with me? Stories matter. Stories matter. They say something about who we are and who we can become. Whether we realize it or not, stories shape how we think, how we love, how we dream, and even how we see the world. Stories, I believe, more than anything, tell us what is possible. And I'm not only talking about the bedtime stories my mom told my brother and I, but right now I'm talking about those larger narratives that are told loudly and quietly every single day in our society. Stories that we hear through the media, through our criminal justice system, through education and advertisements, in our music, from our religious institutions, and even from some of our families. I don't know about you, but I got some crazy people in my family who say all types of stories that are not that nice about groups of folks, not the most social justice story, right? Am I the only one who said at the Thanksgiving table, like, Uncle, what's going on with you? You know I'm an activist, right? You can't say that to me. Y'all know the stories that Black people are lazy. And some Black people say that too. Maybe y'all don't got uncles and aunties like me. Stories that Black people are lazy, that women are not as strong as men, that all Muslims are terrorists, that being physically attractive means you must be a certain weight and skin color and have certain features. And I know everyone's heard this one, that if you're poor, it's because you don't work hard. Stories matter. I told you I want to talk a little bit about Dr. King. The story we tell about Dr. King matters not only because we want to get the facts straight, but because King's legacy, and this is why I think it's still so important, is not primarily about the past, but it's really a contest over the future of our society. That means King's story is more than King's story, it's our story too. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel put it this way, quote, "The whole future of America will depend on the impact and influence of Dr. King." The popular story of Dr. King, and this is why, again, I think it's so important to talk about. The popular story of Dr. King is a lullaby. It's a lullaby. It's a song intended to keep us asleep. We say stay woke, right? Well, that popular story of Dr. King is intended to keep us asleep, to prevent us from being and staying woke. The King I was taught in public schools. Now I know y'all go to these prestigious schools and you know better than I do, but I'm just gonna give it to you how it was given to me. The King I was taught in public schools was like Santa Claus, a magical figure who came around once a year to confirm our national illusions, this country's deepest fantasies about itself. The idea that we live in a land of liberty and justice for all. The idea that we are a beacon of democracy across the world. But the mythical king is far from the historical king. America's most famous preacher was much more than the 4-word sentence we know him for. King not only had a dream, he asked certain basic questions about American society, like what good is having the right to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford to buy a hamburger? Simple but important questions like, why are there 40 million poor people in America? Yet we think his birthday is all about service. King didn't die because he was at soup kitchens or planting flowers, even though there's nothing wrong with that. But let's be clear. Dr. King cared about more than just racial justice. He was deeply concerned with what he called the triple evils of racism, militarism, and poverty. He pushed for universal employment for all people. He critiqued the war in Vietnam when it was unpopular and dangerous to do so. He launched a poor people's campaign. The FBI called him, quote, the most dangerous man in America. And by the end of his life, 72% of white Americans and 55% of Black Americans disapproved of King's efforts to end war and eradicate poverty. And this may be hard to believe, but Dr. King died unpopular and heartbroken. He suffered depression, and just days before his assassination, he asked his friend and famous actor, Harry Belafonte, are we integrating into a burning house? But I'm a preacher, like King was a preacher, and I went to Morehouse College, like King went to Morehouse College. So we learn how to bring some good news out of bad situations. We learn how to dream out of nightmares. And so still, despite all of this injustice and oppression, King never lost hope in the possibility of transforming society. not the inevitability of transforming society, but the possibility of transforming society. He died calling for a revolution of values. He understood that social change involves ethical formation as much as it does political struggle. What do I mean by that? I just mean that he knew that we cannot remake society without transforming ourselves, and that we cannot transform ourselves without remaking society. For King, revolutionary struggle is not simply a matter of politics. Whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, whether you are a liberal or a conservative, as if those are our only choices, by the way. But that's for another talk. Hopefully you'll have me back. For King, is what he learned in Sunday school, that all of God's children matter. Now, of course, Dr. King is but one part of a larger pantheon of Black people, men and women, straight and queer, who struggled mightily to transform this country. I'm talking about Black women like Ella Baker, behind the scenes organizer for over 5 decades, strategist and principal advisor of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the constructive critic of Dr. King and his style of charismatic leadership. She said things like, "We are the leaders we've been looking for." Ella Baker. I'm talking about Black women like Fannie Lou Hamer. Y'all know who Fannie Lou Hamer is? Community organizer, co-founder of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. She got up in 1964 at the Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City, and she spoke so well and so eloquently about Black people having the right to vote that President Johnson had the national television shows cut her off, and he had an impromptu speech because he was so scared about how she would rile the country to transform its ways. Fannie Lou Hamer, who was the youngest of 20 children, who dropped out of school at 12 years old and picked cotton to support her family. Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm talking about people like Bayard Rustin, a Black gay man, Quaker, and friend of Dr. King, who was the principal organizer of the historic March on Washington. I'm talking about the Combahee River Collective, a Black feminist lesbian organization who articulated the politics of intersectionality long before it became a part of our mainstream political vocabulary. Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Bayard Rustin, the Combahee River Collective. I'm talking about Mumia Abu-Jamal and a Black sister by the name of Assata Shakur. Black power advocates, one living in a Pennsylvania prison cell and the other in exile in Cuba, who reminds us that, quote, "we have nothing to lose but our chains." This is not the Black history I read in my high school textbooks. You know what Black history kind of sounded like to me growing up? The mainstream version, you know what it sounded like? Slavery was bad, but things are getting better. The KKK was really mad that Black people got free, so they started lynching Black folks. But the NAACP came along and they fixed all that. And then some cultural stuff happened in the 1920s or whatever. And then this guy, he was young, he graduated from the school called Morehouse College. He went to Montgomery and they started a bus boycott, and he marched all through the 1960s. And there was this woman named, what's her name? Rosa Parks. And, you know, she just got tired and she refused to sit down on the bus. And tragically, on April 4th, 1968, someone shot and killed Dr. King, blew his head off when he was standing on a balcony at the Lorraine Motel. And then voila, Barack Obama became president, fulfilling the dream of Dr. King. We don't get any history of Marunage. We talk about slavery, but we don't talk about the fact that Black people left the plantation. And they left the plantation, and some of them actually built their own autonomous, self-determining communities. These are called maroon communities. We talk about lynching, the KKK, but we don't talk about anti-lynching. Maybe we talk about Du Bois arguing in the courts, but we don't talk about Ida B. Wells, a Black woman who was so powerfully eloquent in her journalism that they put a dot on her head, threatened her life because her pen was so dangerous. We talk about Jim Crow and the civil rights organizations, but we don't want to talk about the Black Panther Party. We see them as some kind of gun-toting young Black folks who are just angry at the police, but we don't see their 10-point program. We don't remember the fact that they started a free breakfast for children program. They said, how can our babies learn if they're hungry when they go to school? So we're going to feed them if the school doesn't. And you know what? When we feed them, we're going to teach them, why are you hungry? And the kids up the hill are not hungry. We're going to teach them about socialism. And you know what the United States government did? They said, oh, let's make sure we feed the kids so that they don't learn about socialism. So the United States government adopted that program to feed children in schools. I know y'all didn't know. I know some of y'all didn't know. I'm just trying to give a larger history. Trying to give a larger history. We don't talk about the anti-apartheid movement because God forbid that means that Black people didn't just care about the United States, but Black people cared about what was happening across the world. That's why they killed Dr. King. They killed him not because he was fighting against racial justice, but because he understood that racism was connected to militarism, which was connected to poverty. He began to critique the war in Vietnam, and the same thing has happened today. Do you know that Nelson Mandela was put, I'm in my bag now, I'm just gonna go off. You know that Nelson Mandela was put on the FBI's most wanted list. He was seen as a terrorist. And now we tote him and call him our beloved. We need to think about what kind of story we tell about our history. Don't get me wrong, I want to be clear. Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott are both important. Matter of fact, Rosa Parks was not tired. She was a trained organizer and activist who was trained at the Highlander School in, I think that's Tennessee. This was a planned action that she willingly took on and was arrested in order to help out and support and be engaged in the movement. So I want to be very clear about that. See how we tell history? It's one thing to say, oh, this old woman just, she was just tired. That's one story. The other is, no, this old Black woman, she went to school and got trained and she was with Dr. King and she was at a school called the Highlander where you had to eat lunch with other people of other races and you had to study nonviolent resistance to do the types of things she did. So I ain't dissing Rosa Parks. I just know a broader history and we need to all know that. I'm just trying to say that the history of Black people in the United States and throughout the world is much more expansive than gaining the right to vote and refusing to sit at the back of the bus. It's more expansive than one singular, charismatic, Black, heterosexual, cisgendered man, usually from a religious institution. So Black history requires, if we're going to truly celebrate it, it requires us to do more than simply tell a story about how we no longer sit at the back of the bus. The best of our, or who was the first to do what? Y'all know that story. Ain't nothing wrong with it. And we love this Black person was the first to do, but we don't question what they did. It's a lot of things that I don't want to be the first to do. I don't want to be the first to run the military. I don't want to be the first to drop bombs on Muslim countries. I don't want to be the first leader of an empire. But that's a whole nother time. I can't wait to the Q&A. Y'all with me? Y'all with me? I'm giving y'all all I got and I'm tired today. The best of our history compels us to ask questions like, why in 2021 are there so many schools where every kid on the bus is Black and others where every kid on the bus is white? It moves us from the celebration of legislation that at least de jure desegregated American society to a critique of the reality that 60 years later, the United States is more segregated than it's ever been. Y'all with me? So if we want to complete and not merely commemorate Dr. King's dream and the movement that made him possible, because King didn't start a movement started King. And that movement was filled with Black women, some of whom I've named, but so many more. Claudia Jones, right? Septima Clark, right? We look at Catherine Cleaver, so many. So if we want to complete and not merely celebrate Dr. King's dream and the movement that made him and the dream possible, we must break free from the same old story we've been telling ourselves, that things are bad but getting better, that we've come a long way but still have a long way to go, which of course tells us nothing about where it is that we're going. We have to let go of comforting lies, y'all, and face certain terrifying facts. That there are over 2 million Americans locked up in our prisons, jails, and juvenile detention centers, and another 5 million more under carceral control. that 1 in every 3 Black children are growing up poor in the richest nation on earth, that climate change is expected to kill about 250,000 people every year. And it need not be that way. It need not be that way. But some people and some corporations are more interested in saving capitalism than they are saving the world. Certain terrifying facts: that almost half of all Black transgender women report being incarcerated at some time in their life. In New Jersey, I'm currently in New Jersey, I'm from Jersey, which is the last northern state to abolish slavery, by the way. Do you know what the average net worth of a white family is in the state of New Jersey? Just guess. The average net worth of a white family in the state of New Jersey. Just guess. Don't Google it. I see some of y'all Googling. I know y'all like to Google. According to one report, according to the New Jersey Institute of Social Justice, the average net worth of a white family in the state of New Jersey is $271,402. It's the highest in the country. What do you think the average net worth of a Black family is in the state of New Jersey? Same state. $5,900. And about $7,000 for Latinx families. Remember that I said stories are important? Remember that? There's a lot of different stories that people say to explain this racial and economic inequality. One of the stories goes like, well, Black people are lazy and white folks just work harder. One story is, well, you know, if they didn't listen to that hip hop music and sag their pants and stop killing each other, you know, and white New Jerseyans are just more frugal with their money. It's another story. Those are lies. They're fables, they're fantasies, they're national illusions. The reality, the truth is that this disparity does not exist because white Americans work harder than the rest of us. Not that white Americans don't work hard, many do. But the fact is that this disparity does not exist because of that. It is a direct result of institutionalized racism. And I mean this exactly the way I said it. It is a direct result. Now, what do I mean? I want to make good on my claim. I don't want you to take my word for it. So of course we got to study the history. So how did the United States become the most richest, powerful nation on earth? It wasn't because the settlers were just really savvy. They were very violent. They ended up stealing indigenous land, committing a genocide on indigenous people, capturing and kidnapping Africans, putting them in chains and bringing them here, brutalizing them and making them work for free. How do you become really rich? You steal land and you make people work for free. But let's put slavery aside, because we know that story, right? Let's put slavery aside. We don't have to go all the way back to slavery. Let's talk about the Federal Housing Act and the GI Bill during World War II. Now, I can't give the whole class on it. I would love to come back and talk more in depth about this. But for those who may not know, during World War II, the United States government was trying to build a middle class. Before then, there was a stark inequality, not just between races, but between the elites and everybody else. And there's still that inequality, by the way. I want to be really clear. There's more poor white people in this country than any other race of people. Poverty disproportionately impacts Black folk, but there are more poor white people in this country than any other race. Yet the face of poverty is Black folks. That has everything to do with the way that we try to tell stories about Black people. That's another class. During World War II, the United States government was trying to build a middle class. They did that primarily by two ways. They created this thing called the GI Bill, and the GI Bill allowed soldiers coming back from war to do two things. One was to have access to a home, to buy a home ownership. The most effective way of building wealth in the United States is property ownership, okay? Before World War II, you had to put like 90% down on a home. They rearranged the mortgage system so you had to put about 10% down on a home, so it allowed a lot more people to purchase homes. The second thing the GI Bill did, and it did a few things, but these are two of the most important, it was give access to higher education. So it allowed more people to go to college. So now you got Black soldiers, you got white soldiers who are fighting alongside each other abroad. They come back home. The United States government is trying to build this middle class. Guess who got access to the GI Bill? White soldiers. Guess who did not get access to the GI Bill? Over 1 million Black soldiers. Guess why? they did not get access to the GI Bill because they were Black. Not because they listened to hip hop music or backed in the blues. Not because they fought any less hard in the Army. Matter of fact, quite the opposite. They had to fight even harder just to stay in the Army, even in segregated units, because they were Black. So the United States government built suburbs. One of the first was in Levittown, New York. And as they were building suburbs for these white soldiers and their families, building out this white middle class, they had to figure out what to do with all these Black folk, right? Over 1 million soldiers. You know what they did? They built housing projects. Those are government constructed housing that persists today. Yet we act like it's the creation of Black folks. Like we built those and we decided to live in them. All right, I gotta stop because this is so much. I'm just going into the whole class. What I'm trying to say is $271,402 for average white family in New Jersey, $5,900 for the average Black family. How do we get there? Oh, you don't have access to property ownership. Oh, you don't have access to higher education. Oh, the quickest way of building wealth in the United States is through property ownership and access to higher education. Make that a generational thing. The illusions and the lies keep us from that truth. Because when we tell that truth, then the idea of meritocracy that holds so much of the white identity together begins to shatter. But that shattering is a miracle for those who happen to be white. It allows for transformation. You can be a much better person. So our dark past continues. I'm gonna wrap up soon. Our dark past continues to shadow our present moment. And I promised I wouldn't harp on this, but y'all wanted me to talk about voting. I'm gonna talk about something specific. I do need to say this. I won't harp on it, but I'm gonna say it. I won't harp on it. Donald Trump is not an aberration of American history. That is, aberration is like a mathematical term. It means something odd, something that's not usual, something out of the norm. Trump is not an aberration, not something odd in American history. He is an elaboration of the underside of that history. Him and his presidency simply embodied the nastiness of a nation built on indigenous genocide, the enslavement of Africans, the colonization of Mexico, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, Hawaii, and Guam, the incarceration of Japanese people in concentration camps, and the vilification of Arabs, Muslims, Jews, and immigrants from across the diaspora. Trump's election was not a departure, but rather a disclosure of what this country has always been about. All right, I won't harp no more, but I got lots to say about the current election. I'm gonna leave that for the Q&A. These are dark times, but I'm a preacher, so I believe that even the darkest facts can never eclipse the light of truth. And the truth is that despite a history of injustice, despite the 2 million people locked up in our prisons, jails, and juvenile detention centers, despite the fact that 1 in every 3 Black children are growing up poor in the richest nation on earth, despite the fact that half of all Black transgender women report being incarcerated at some point in their life, despite the fact that 250,000 people will die of climate change if we don't do something about it, despite all of this, I believe that we are still more than the sum of our oppression, meaning I think that we are better than the worst things that have happened to us. The truth is that we are not helpless victims, but we are, if we're willing to be, if we're open to it, the inheritors of a grand tradition of struggle that amid the ashes of slavery and lynching and Jim Crow created the spirituals and soul food that I talked about earlier, and the most powerful social movements this country has ever seen. And we're seeing the most marvelous iteration of it from 2014. In Ferguson, Missouri, a small little suburb outside of St. Louis, to Minneapolis in 2020, where folks in the midst of a merciless pandemic is refusing to let death have the last word. So we must tell a different story, not only of where we've been, but of where we are and where we can go. And we tell that story not merely with the words we say, but with the lives that we lead. A different story. Stories of hope. Stories of resistance, stories of the power of love in the face of hate, stories that remind us that we're only here today because of the sacrifices of those who came before us, people who never lost hope and risked it all to make real the promises of democracy. If Dr. King is right, and the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, then it only bends because people like you and I are willing to push it in the direction of freedom and justice. So I'm about to wrap up, and hopefully we can get into some of the Q&A. I just want to ask a question. What story is your life telling? What story is your life telling? What will people say about us when it's all said and done? Will they say we drove nice cars and graduated from prestigious schools? Will they say that we were eloquent but silent on the most pressing moral issues of our time? Or will they say that we spoke truth to power and stood in solidarity with the most vulnerable? Will they say that we lived our lives in the service of others, that we struggled to make the world maybe just a little bit better than we found it? That we kept alive Dr. King's dream in the face of the deathly conditions of our cherished form of life? That's what my mom taught me in that little room next to the sun parlor. Me and my brother learned how to dream. And that's all I want us to do today. And that's all I invite us to do at the brunch table before we get up and take this food and let it be fuel to what we're going to do next. Dream of a world where Michael Brown can go to college and Tamir Rice can play at the park, 12 years old, shot down with a toy gun at his favorite park where he would play every day by a white police officer. A world where Muslims and Jews and Christians can live and pray in peace. A world where queer and transgender people are safe to walk the streets and use the bathrooms of their choice. A world where women are not subject to less pay for more work. A world where Black lives matter, where walls are built to house the poor, not to criminalize poverty. A world where access to clean water is a human right. A world where poverty is illegal. Where you don't need money to breathe good air, to have access to good food, and to have a place to call home. I know what I'm asking you is impossible, James Baldwin told his nephew in 1963. I know what I am asking you is impossible, James Baldwin told his nephew in 1963. But in our time, James Baldwin continued, as in every time, the impossible is the least, the very least that one can demand. Thank y'all so much. Excited for Q&A.
Well, thank you. Now, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your heart with us. We have about 10 minutes for Q&A. And of course, we have some prepared questions, but we would much more prefer to hear questions from you all. So if you would like to, you can put your questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask your question directly. All right.
Real good, or the food was bad. I don't know which one, but it was good.
Sounds like everybody full. Everybody full. Go ahead, Robert.
Okay. I don't necessarily have a question per se, but kind of a reaction to what you've been talking about for the last couple of minutes. And thank you for the James. I was waiting for. I just knew you some way somehow were going to say something about James Baldwin, who is clearly my guy.
Oh man, the muse.
Oh, he's my literary godfather. So. But I think everything that you said, especially with the mention of Ida B. Wells, who I've just been introduced to throughout my Black History course, of being such a pivotal person within Black history, especially in the era of lynching, and really, and especially in Red Record, and listing time after time after time, it is not disputable at all what is happening. But even more importantly, with the story of lynching, and even though I'm stealing my history teacher words, but really taking that that pride in a sense, those whip marks on the back of the lashes on the backs of these enslaved people. I take that as a sense of pride of that they didn't take what was happening to them as what is, but they were continuously fighting for what they saw. And they were fighting on the backs of the future. You know, they deemed the future to be essential, even though they knew they weren't a part of it.
I think it's, I'm sorry, Scott, or someone has need to mute themselves.
Yeah, so they knew that the future was essential, but they knew they wouldn't be a part of it, but they knew they were going to fight tirelessly for it. And the lashes on the back of their backs, showed that endless fight. Like, they talk about the enslaved people being on the plantations tirelessly working, but they also talk about them fleeing, but the reasons behind their fleeing continuously. That is a story that speaks the same amount of volume, if not more, of that. That is how we got here in the first place. The Emancipation Proclamation was not something that just came from a white man just saying, okay, we're just going to do it. No. And even the Civil War and Reconstruction, which is clearly another word for violence. That's another word that I'm stealing from her. But that, and what came from that, you know, was not really just the North winning. And yes, slavery is bad, but it's really a repudiation to what the Southern oligarchy was building. So were they really anti-slavists? So were they really just let us be the winners? Let us make what we want to be right. And the South was really capitalizing on, you know, free labor. So all of that, I think, just like you said, you don't want to teach a class, but I think what you gave was a masterclass to already what I've been going through. And I'm so intertwined and very passionate about this type of stuff. So I would love to continue to have conversations with you beyond a 10-minute period. So
please. I was going to say, send me your writing. Yeah, if you're willing, I would love to read it and be in conversation. Everything you said, I have like a million things to say. I do mainly want to say, clearly you're brilliant, and clearly you have so much to offer. You have the authority already of an educator and of someone who can command information, and that's rare. It's rare. It took me a long time to even be able to do what I do. I don't know how old you are, you know, I don't need to know. I just can sense that there's something very special in you. I won't get too preachily, but I am a spiritual person. So I hope that you keep doing that. I hope that you keep following your vocation, because there's something very special there. And I hope you stay humble as you do it, because you got a bright, bright future. But I want to talk about why policing started in South Carolina, precisely because people were raising hell against the institution of slavery, so much so that they broke the back of slavery. The Fugitive Slave Act deputized, it necessitated white people to become police. You know, it was illegal for them not to be police. That's essentially what the Fugitive Slave Act meant. It meant if you did not catch a slave, you would get in trouble. It was illegal for you not to catch a slave. So it's no accident that policing began in South Carolina, the same place that on the heels of the Haitian Rebellion, people like Denmark Vesey and others were rising up against, right? Denmark Vesey's plot was the bloodiest in American history, and it shook the foundations. It really shook up the Americas. And he knew French, so he was translating French newspapers from Haiti and using that to inspire fellow enslaved Africans to rise up again. Then we get policing from there. But so much of what you said, my God, is all there. So thank you. I'll get to a few other people. So hit me up. I'll just put my email in the chat. I will say though, real quick, I hate to take too much time. I am so beyond capacity. So please don't, if you email me, I want to follow up super duper. Just feel free to email again. Right now in particular, it's real tough for me as I'm literally today weighing options of where to go after my PhD. So just holler at me. I'm gonna put the email in the chat.
Any other questions from the group?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm not sure how much time is left, but
all yours. I could do a little longer.
I know that you do a lot of parallels between yourself and Martin Luther King Jr. And I understand he was a bit of an optimist, you know, pro-integration and all that good stuff. But my question for you is, do you think that humans are inherently flawed? Like there's something within us that, you know, we're just born greedy or we're born selfish, et cetera, et cetera. And if so, if you do believe that, then what's the point? And I have a follow-up question if you want to answer that after you answer this one. But yeah, that's my question.
I think human beings are heroic and pathetic, and usually somewhere in between. I think the history of humanity is my evidence. I don't know how to prove what we are inherently. So I'll spend more time thinking about what we've actually done. And what we've actually done, to me, seems to be quite pathetic. And I mean that in the classical sense of the word, and also amazingly heroic. More pathetic than heroic, but the heroic is there. I mean, like that's what we talked about. We talked about heroes and sheroes. And so I think, I don't know a human being that's perfect. I can say that. I'm surely not. I'm far from it. I have lots of flaws. Part of the reason why, even though I'm quite non-traditional as a Christian, or I call myself a Nat Turner Christian, because I'm in many ways, my politics don't gel with the mainstream church. I'm deeply flawed. And part of my Christianity, part of my religiosity, that humility of my fallibility, that I'm flawed, is at the heart of that. I know that I'm messed up, but I know that I also can be beautiful. Baldwin said it, more beautiful, more terrible. And for me, that's been all my experiences. From my mom, who's the most beautiful woman in the world. Is she perfect? No. But she's been heroic in that. She's even been able to raise those 3 Black boys, like I said.
There's a question in the chat that I want to make sure I looked over, we didn't get to. So I want to make sure that we get that too. And it speaks to your thoughts about the work that Stacey Abrams has done in the state of Georgia, as well as your thoughts on the election of the first vice president who identifies as Black and Asian and also a woman.
Sure. So this is going to be it necessitates a much longer answer. And I might make some people mad, but that's okay. Y'all don't have to like all the food. So Stacey Abrams was critical to turning Georgia red, turning Georgia blue. Critical. I mean, there's no denying, and I think she deserves lots and lots of kudos and lots of praise. And, you know, especially being a Black woman, oftentimes Black women do the work, but Black men get the credit. And I come out of the Black church, so I know that, and I'm a big advocate of trying to fight against that. So I think it's really important to celebrate her. I also think we need to be really careful not to make her to sort of replace charismatic Black men with charismatic Black women. I don't think we should sort of just simply reverse the roles. If we're gonna be critical about, you know, and I'm not anti-charisma. Ella Baker, I make this argument in one of my papers. Ella Baker wasn't anti-charisma. She wanted to democratize charisma. That means she wanted to show that everybody has a charism in the Latin, which means gift. So she wasn't telling people to make themselves small. She was inviting people to make us bigger and to do it together. So with that said, we got to celebrate Stacey Abrams. We also got to celebrate all those Black women, some of whom are my friends, who knocked on doors, who unpaid organizers, who moved from Boston and Chicago, and for 3 months, 6 months, went to Georgia with no money, little money, left their jobs, you feel me, and made that happen. So just like Martin Luther King didn't make the movement made him, I would say the same thing about Stacey Abrams. I think it's very important to celebrate her. I think what she did was remarkable. I also think that it took a movement of people across the state of Georgia and across the country to make that happen. In terms of Kamala, Vice President Kamala Harris, there's a lot to be said. And on the one hand, I do think representation matters. I think it matters that she's a Black woman. I think it matters that she's the first Black woman vice president. I think it matters that, you know, she's a Black and Asian, the first. At the same time, representation is not enough. Representation without transformation, to me, is actually a problem. And so I first learned about Kamala Harris as the top cop in California when she was a prosecutor. And from my understanding, most of her policies were actually bad for Black women. Now, doesn't mean she can't change. Doesn't mean that she won't do better I pray. And I think that the social movements can push her, just like Joe Biden. I have very little confidence in Joe Biden. I have very little confidence in Kamala Harris. But if they're going to do anything good, it's because of the Black Lives Matter movement. It's because of Black women who are not elite, who don't have jobs in Congress. And as much as I love the squad, they're got to be pushed too. I love it. I love Cori Bush. I love AOC, all these folks. This is amazing, but it's organizers, and they'll tell you it's organizers, primarily Black women, but people of all races, all genders, all sexualities who made that happen. So I think Kamala can be pushed, but I think it's going to take a movement which exists to push her to the left. I think we have to be serious about the fact that her policies in California and throughout most of her career had actually been bad for Black mothers, Black people. She was a part of the mass incarceration. But I think that there's progress that can be made, and I think she needs to be pushed. I'm excited about the possibility, but I think it's very dangerous to substitute transformation for representation. I can talk about Barack Obama all day. Barack Obama droned Muslim countries. He deported more people than any other president in American history. His response to police violence was a national mentoring program. Essentially, what he said after Trayvon Martin got killed by a white supremacist named George Zimmerman is that we need to help Trayvon Martin of America, not the George Zimmermans of America. Why does Black kids need a mentoring program after they get killed by a white vigilante? What sense does that make? It plays into a Black cultural pathology narrative, whether it's intentional or not. And I don't think it's intentional, but it shows how deep our racist narratives run, that when Black kids are shot down by white supremacists, we go mentor the Black kids. Why does the Black kids need mentoring? Because he was trying to go home to watch the All-Star game? Mentor George Zimmerman. So it ain't about just Kamala Harris. I got critiques across the board, trust me. But I think that there's a possibility there. I think like all things, the brother said it earlier, Abraham Lincoln didn't wake up one morning and say, oh, it's messed up what we did to Black people for hundreds of years. There was an abolition movement that pushed him. He didn't want to end slavery. He wanted to save the Union. It pushed him. I don't believe in elites. Not saying they're all bad people, but I don't believe in capitalists. Not saying that they're not good fathers and mothers. I'm saying that I believe, like Fannie Lou Hamer, and like Ella Baker, and like Claudia Jones, and like Septima Clark, I believe in the genius of average, ordinary, working class, and poor folk across race, across class, across sexuality, across language, across gender, across religion. I'm rooting for everybody, as my partner says, I'm rooting for everybody resisting oppression. That's what I'm rooting for. So I hope that's helpful. I wish I could have more details, but that's how I feel.
So now I got to ask. You talked about you provided critique for Stacey Abrams and Kamala Harris, and you talked a lot about the people on the ground, those who are involved in the movement, and it made me think about Ice Cube and his it made me think about Ice Cube. So I'm be interested to hear what you think that represents, what he represents, what he could add to the conversation related to Black America, but also what Ice Cube represents both past and current.
Sure. Well, I think the narrative of a sellout, it makes it difficult to have a serious conversation about what's actually happening. So I don't know if Ice Cube is a sellout. I'm just not sure how to make that calculation. I mean, some folks clearly, but for all I could tell, Ice Cube, maybe a good person who genuinely cares about Black people. So let's assume that Ice Cube is that kind of person. Let's assume that he genuinely is coming from a good place. Let's assume that, because I just don't have evidence as to be otherwise, and I try to be generous. That's my orientation. My orientation is towards generosity. Let's assume he's just not selling out and has some sort of backdoor things happening where he's getting paid by the presidency. Now, if he is, then that's the answer. I don't have to say much about that. But let's assume he's not, because I don't know if he is. There's a couple of things. One is, I think that the question of whether he's a sellout or not, or it's the focus on him, it actually takes some of the attention away from the actual idea of the Platinum program. So we begin to ask, well, what do we think about Ice Cube meeting with Donald Trump? That's an important question. But I think there's another, maybe more important, is what do we think about the Platinum plan? What do we think about that actual plan? Whether it was Ice Cube who met with them or whether it was someone else, right? Like, what do we think about the actual plan? You know, I don't think Black capitalism will save Black people. The Black Panther Party said that very like clearly. They elucidated that fact. You know, so I have a pretty strong critique of the idea of what he met Donald Trump for. I also do think that these things can be quite complicated. Malcolm X met with the KKK. Now, Ice Cube's no Malcolm X, right? By no way am I claiming that. Why I'm saying that is because I think there's a more complicated story where you have certain Black nationalists, certain Black people who actually see a certain kind of common cause with people who are white supremacists and otherwise solely for a particular end, meaning you have your land, give me my land, you stay away from my folk, I'll stay away from yours. There's a history of Black folks like that. Now, I'm not meeting with the KKK and I'm not meeting with Donald Trump. And I don't think Ice Cube had Malcolm X meeting with the KKK in mind. So again, I'm not comparing that. I'm just trying to offer a sort of more complicated history to help us think. One, oftentimes these stories are mainly about is such and such a sellout, and we get to lose the actual substance of what it is that we're talking about. And we spend a lot of time speculating off of a person's intentions more than we do the actual impact of what would happen. I think the impact of a very thin, non-specific platinum plan that's sort of shrouded in this sort of Black capitalist language, I think that's dead upon arrival. And I think it's clear that that has never worked for Black people, and I think it never will. So in terms of the platinum plan himself, I'm not excited about it. And I would tell Ice Cube, hey man, I think you can use your resources for much better things. Like how about invest in co-ops? You know, how about invest in community-based organizations? How about, you know, do political education work with young people so that they can actually start thinking about social entrepreneurship? So, I mean, I would have other ideas for someone like him who has a lot of resources. But I don't know, you know, I don't know his deal. I know he started doing a lot of cop movies. I missed the Fridays. I missed the old school Ice Cube in terms of acting. I'm like, dang, you were copping in every movie. And I like some cop movies. I don't like cops, but I like some cop movies. I'm a little complicated. I ain't gonna lie to y'all.
Do we have time for one more or no?
I'm here.
Okay. I know that this is controversial, or it's been, the media has portrayed it and it's been, you know, propaganda has taken control of it. But the phrase of defund the police, what is your opinion on that, and exactly how we can, because I know for myself, I know what it means. Black people, we know what it means. Or at least most people who actually understand what is going on know what it means, we know. But as far as defund the police, do you think that there should be a new way of forming that message? You know, switching simply that phrase has been taken control of by people who do not understand the true meaning of it. Could you even say, you can use even a clear example, people want to look up the clear example of how someone doesn't understand it, how someone who does can explain to someone. Meghan McCain and Kamala Harris, when she was on The View, and she kind of misunderstood the entire point of what defund the police means. So basically, and to sum up, do you agree with the phrase? Because I know you agree with the concept of it, but do you agree with the phrasing of it, or do you think it should be changed?
Well, I think it depends on what folks mean by it, the substance that they infuse into it. So, you know, for some politicians, it might just be a cool way to sort of buzz their way into what's happening with no substance behind it. With actual organizers who are building defund the police campaigns, I'm rocking with that, you know, and I'm gonna be back. I must be in solidarity with that. I think this is extremely important. I mean, I think the two major responses to police violence are both extremely important, one of which is defunding the police and the other of which is abolishing the police. I think both of those are extremely important for a few reasons. Some people still are sort of learning about the history of police, the reality of police, the function of police. And so they may still be in a place where, you know, they're like, I know we need to defund the police, because in cities like Chicago, at one point, they were getting like 50% of the municipal budget while 50 public schools were being shut down at the same time. You don't have to be an abolitionist to know that's wrong, right? You can just sort of think about money. If money talks, what does that say about our values? If money talks, what does that say about our values? So I think a lot of people are getting bored with defund the police because it's quite clear that if you want to prevent harm, then you have to get to the root causes. And police do not get to the root causes of harm. In fact, in many ways, they actually produce harm. And so how do we get to the root causes of harm? Well, some of which is you take the money of a municipal budget, and you give it to community-based organizations. You give it to hospitals, you give it to churches, you give it to social work. You do a UBI, a universal basic income. There's so many other things you can do with that 50% so that, you know, my partner, I'm gonna put up her essay in The Atlantic. It's amazing. She's writing a book on police abolition right now. It's amazing. So she can talk about this better than I do. But most crimes are committed by poor people against poor people. Like the overwhelming amount of people who commit crime are poor. Why? It's not because they were born criminal. It's because when you are poor, what are your options? And police, they can't fix poverty. So if poverty is one of the root causes of crime, then you don't give more money to police. You give more money to paying people and giving them the resources that they need so they don't have to go. The kids who killed Pop Smoke, why did those 14, 15, 16-year-old kids? Why would they go kill Pop Smoke? Like most people do. You know, it wasn't just a beef. It's because he has chains. He has things that they do not have. So I'm not obviously, you know, I don't want nobody to get killed. I want us to get to the root causes. So I think defund is a good start. And I think what it does is it breaks the back of the logic of policing. That is that police can solve all of our social ills. No, police cannot. I think abolition takes it one step further and say, it's not only that police can't solve our social ills, it's that police is a part of the social ill. And we look at it historically all the way through. What do police primarily do? They manage social inequality. Most police officers don't kill Black people in the streets. So when we think police violence is simply about George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, we mistake and understand what the actual role and function of police is. The role and function of police is now what it has always been. Okay, we need to like protect this property, which at the time was Black people. Property was legally Black people. How do you protect that property? You keep them from running away. So that's why slave patrols were created in South Carolina, to protect private property. That has not changed any way, shape, or form. You know, so that's what the role of police is, to protect private property and to manage social inequality. Insofar as that's true, then I think I'm on the abolition side. I think that it's not just the need to defund the police. I think that's a great start, but I think we also need to understand that policing itself is a part of a social ill. And I think that we can just imagine so much better ways to respond to harm in our communities without people with guns. Part of what we have to do is actually attack the gun industry. There are more guns in America than there are people. So as long as we have that many guns, it's going to be hard to abolish the police. You know, so this is a multi-pronged thing. And the best abolitionists that I've learned from, like Fred Moten and Stefano Harvey, who wrote the Undercommons, which is a really good book, or Angela Davis or Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, my partner, Derricka Purnell, they say things like, we're not just trying to abolish the police in prisons, we're trying to abolish a society that needs police in prisons. And by which they mean, we're trying to abolish a capitalistic, patriarchal, private property owning, misogynistic, imperial society. Because when you have all that stuff, you got to have police in prisons. If you have poor people and rich people, you always got to make sure that the rich people are protected. And so you're going to have police. So anyway, I appreciate that. Let me put her article up because it's so good, y'all. I'm always shouting her out, but I'm telling you, it's amazing.
I have a question about that as well. So I've been watching a lot of like true crime and stuff lately. So what do people do in like the situation to where there's a burglar in their house, or if there's like a serial killer on the loose, then like what happens then? Unless like the detectives that kind of like solve that are like kind of different. I'm not sure what to do in the situations of like serial killers and all that. Yeah,
so I mean, part of what it is for us to like understand that responding to police violence isn't sort of a one size fits all thing, right? So it's not like overnight, if we get rid of police, all things are going to be okay. We have to take a step back and first see this larger issue. When people say things, and my partner literally has a chapter in her book called What About the Rapists and What About the Murderers? So she's actually attacking these really hard questions. So I just encourage you to read the book because she can speak to this better than I do. And I just uploaded the article. So I really want to emphasize her expertise on this. But part of what she always tells me is like, when people say, what about the rapists and what about the murderers? She says, which ones? Because they don't all have the same reason why they do what they do. She's just so brilliant. She's been telling me how the second leading cause of murder is controlling women's sexuality. That's the second leading cause of murder. Now, where does controlling women's sexuality come from? Patriarchy. So domestic violence, all of these issues, you can't fix that with police. Now, I think what you're pointing to is what do we do in the immediate? I feel you. I live in a community, I live on Martin Luther King Boulevard, which is ironically like one of the most violent places in any Black community. It's the big irony of chocolate cities. If you are on Martin Luther King Boulevard, you better be careful. Ain't no peace and nonviolence over here. So I feel you on the question, like what do we do in the immediate? I think that the question actually makes it all the more important to look at these more systemic responses. Now, what some people are doing is violence interrupters. So there are certain communities that are funding, instead of police or in addition to police, violence interrupters. So these are people from the community that have respect in the community, some of which who have formerly been violent and committed harm. So they have a certain kind of what we call stain, or they have a certain kind of reputation or credit in these communities, and they can de-escalate situations way better than police can, because police oftentimes escalate it. So in funding violence interrupters is one way. And these are people without guns, but again, they're respected. You know, another is transformative justice. So instead of when those things happen, sending someone immediately to prison, it's trying to understand what was the root cause and the underlying cause. Angela Davis talks about this at the end of her book, Are Prisons Obsolete? I don't think it's perfect, but basically your question, we're asking the same thing. And what we're saying is that obviously police don't do that. Police, most of their work is not response to murder and rape. They don't lock those people up. It's mainly low-level drug offenses. So I think the question is important. I think we first need to realize that the police are not the answer. And then we get to ask, well, what can be the answers? Violence interrupters, transformative restorative justice circles, and other types of ways of funding these things are also really important. What we do in the actual immediate, you know, that's something that we're grappling with. But check out her article, it's so good. And I actually have to go, y'all, I'm sorry.
So now I just want to say thank you for your time with us. Thoroughly appreciate hearing from you and you engaging with those of us who are present this evening. We'll definitely, you know, be in touch. I took down your email, and I know that there are probably other ways that we can engage you in the future. And so thank you to everyone who was here, who participated, who were engaged. We absolutely appreciate you, and we would encourage you to stay tuned to the rest of our events for Black History Month. The month has really just gotten started, so please stay tuned, and we please look out for an assessment. We will be sending out an assessment so that we can get your feedback about what we experienced tonight. So have a good evening, everyone. Have a great week, and thank you all for being here.
Thank y'all so much. Y'all take care.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.